Can universal jurisdiction stop impunity? The human rights group has filed a lawsuit in Germany against Myanmar's military leadership. They're accused of genocide, war crimes and crimes against humanity. But can this lawsuit change the situation on the ground? This is Inside Story. Hello there and welcome to the programme. I'm Laura Kyle. A human rights group has filed a criminal complaint in Germany accusing Myanmar's military of genocide. A group of survivors from ethnic groups across Myanmar have built the case in what activists say is a show of unity that once seemed unthinkable. The trial, brought by Fortify Rights, also accuses the military of crimes against humanity and war crimes over its crackdown on Rohingya Muslims in 2016 and 2017. Security forces allegedly carried out mass rapes and murders during what authorities called a clearance operation. Matthew Smith is the head of Fortify Rights. He explains who the complainants are and why this case is so important.
It's about half of the complainants in the case survived the Rohingya genocide in 2016-2017, and about half of the complainants have survived or witnessed mass atrocity crimes that occurred since the coup on February 1st, 2021. So it is a diverse group of people putting their faith and hope in German authorities that they may achieve some measure of justice. The investigation at the International Criminal Court is very important, but that focuses narrowly on forced deportation as a crime against humanity against Rohingya. So it doesn't cover the mass atrocity crimes that are unfolding on a daily basis. We're seeing massacres, villages getting burned down, people getting arrested, tortured, killed every day in Myanmar. And so with regard to the case at the International Court of Justice in The Hague, that is a case that essentially deals with disputes between states. So that is focusing exclusively on state responsibility for the Rohingya genocide. So in other words, there's no individual criminal liability that will stem from those proceedings at the ICJ. It's a very important case. The Gambia has done a great thing in bringing that case, but it is very different from what we're pushing for in Germany now. It's important that we recognize that not a single perpetrator from Myanmar, despite a lot of attention internationally over the years, not a single perpetrator has been held accountable for these heinous crimes.
Well, Myanmar's ruling junta has played a long and brutal role in the country. In 2016 and 17, a campaign of atrocities by the army on the Muslim Rohingya sent hundreds of thousands fleeing across the border into Bangladesh. The world expressed outrage and the generals faced charges of genocide at the International Court of Justice. The military is also under investigation at the International Criminal Court. In 2016, Aung San Suu Kyi was elected leader in the military's brief experiment with democracy. That ended in 2021. On the 1st of February, Suu Kyi was one of thousands arrested when the military seized back power from the civilian government. The junta's violent crackdown against all opposition has since united many of the country's diverse ethnic groups against the military rulers. Well, here are our guests. And in London, Christopher Gunness, director of the Myanmar Accountability Project. Also in London, Toby Cadma, lawyer and co-founder of the Guernica Group. And joining us from a location we're not disclosing for his safety is Dr. Sasa, spokesman for the National Unity Government of Myanmar. And just a note that our team has reached out to Myanmar's junta, but we did not receive a response. So let's get the discussion going. And Chris, this case in Germany is just one of a number that have been filed in a number of different countries. Do you support it? Because your own organisation has filed a separate case in Turkey, has it not?
We absolutely support it, to be very clear, and we support the work of all groups like Fortify Rights, like Toby's organisation Guernica and others, who are basically closing in as best they can using all instruments possible, legal instruments, on the junta. So yes, you're right, there is a case in Argentina, there's now this case in Germany, we have a case in Turkey, and just in the next day I will be testifying to the Indonesian Constitutional Court about the possibility of bringing a case in Indonesia, and we are also in conversation with legal experts in the Philippines, where we think the prospect for a trial are very good. So we're hoping to do more work in 2023 in ASEAN, but to be clear, we absolutely support this case with Fortify Rights. We hope that the German prosecutors will open not just a structural investigation, but will move to an actual investigation. It's not clear that they will, but we absolutely join the call by Fortify Rights, and I'm sure by Guernica and others. The more pressure we can bring on the junta through legal work, the better.
Your organisation approached the Chief Prosecutor's Office in Turkey back in March. What's happened since then?
Well, I'm pleased to say that the Chief Prosecutor in Istanbul has accepted our file. He has sent it off to the Ministry of Justice in Ankara. They are very actively investigating. And the good thing about these investigations is the junta knows they're being scrutinized. Yes, the wheels of international law turn very slowly, but they do turn. Going back to the Eichmann trial, the Nazi in Israel, on through the work in the former Yugoslavia, which saw Karadzic, Mladic, Milosevic actually in The Hague, and on to the Rwanda genocide. So I can understand the sort of slight cynicism perhaps behind the title of your program, the idea that, will there be accountability? We say absolutely. That is why we're all working. There will be accountability. It will take time. And in the meantime, the junta, which is clearly committing genocide, it's committing crimes against humanity, torture, massacre, the most appalling aerial bombardments of civilian targets without any due respect for international law that relates to the protection of civilians. All of that is being ignored, but this work serves them notice that they are being scrutinized, they're being investigated, and we hope and we pray that someday they will be in court and that ultimately, as has happened to Yugoslav dictators and others, they will be banged up in prison, which is where they belong.
Toby, two questions there initially. Do these cases bring about accountability, firstly? And secondly, why launch them in multiple different countries?
Thank you. Well, let me just support and endorse everything that Chris has said, and I think it is important to adopt a multi-jurisdictional approach in cases like this. And I, for one, think that support the initiative in Germany. I think it is an important advance on ensuring accountability. Quite often we look at different jurisdictions. There may be victims in those jurisdictions. There may be suspects within the refugee pool, and so quite often you will look at the opportunities that present themselves. Just today, we've had the Swiss federal prosecutor seeking to bring charges against a Gambian national in a matter that we were involved with over the years. And so it is significant, and it does have an impact. When you have a vacuum of accountability in the jurisdiction, in the country where the crimes were committed, you have to look elsewhere. When there are limitations on international jurisdiction, you have to look to universal jurisdiction in order to ensure that victims have a voice and that there is a process which is aimed at holding these individuals accountable for the most atrocious crimes. And the situation in Myanmar with the plight of the Rohingya, which have been subjected to, as Chris has quite rightly said, a policy of genocide, then of course you have to look at whatever opportunities you can. And Germany has certainly shown itself in the last couple of years as to be an appropriate forum in relation to the holding Syrian regime figures accountable, holding ISIS members accountable. So Germany has increasingly advanced as one of the countries where there is a process where accountability can be pursued. But that is happening across Europe, and we shouldn't limit it just for one jurisdiction.
But Toby, do these cases not risk undermining the work of the international courts, the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, which also have cases and investigations into Myanmar underway?
Well, the whole practice of the International Criminal Court is based on a process of complementarity, and so it is complementary to the national jurisdiction, and quite often, and again, Chris has quite rightly stated that the wheels of international justice, and as you have said, the wheels of international justice move very slowly. Sometimes you can't just rely on international accountability. And if we look at the International Criminal Court in particular, it has very limited resources to dedicate to cases of this kind. It is only going to hold accountable the most senior military and political leaders who are responsible for the genocide. And so there has to be a complementary process in order to hold those potentially slightly lower down the chain of command accountable. And so, just focusing and waiting for the International Criminal Court to conclude their investigations and bring charges is not a sensible strategy when you're looking at a conflict or a situation such as this.
Dr. Sasa, let's take a step in. Chris, of course.
Laura, if I could just, before you bring in Dr. Sasa, who I think will be interested in what I'm about to say, to add and build on what Toby has said, the British government and dozens of other member states referred Putin and his aggression against Ukraine to the International Criminal Court. And if the British government, the pen holder at the Security Council in New York, wanted to refer the Myanmar junta, not through the Security Council, but bilaterally to the ICC, they could do it. And groups like ours, MAP and others, are pushing very hard for the British government and others to do that. They've not done it, and they've not given us a decent explanation of why they haven't done it. The National Unity Government, Dr. Sasa and his excellent ministers, have made a declaration that they accept the jurisdiction of the court. Why hasn't Britain, why haven't other member states of the Rome Statute that governs the International Criminal Court, why haven't they made a reference to the court just as they had for Putin? And I'm sure Dr. Sasa will have things to say about that.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Sasa, let's bring you in at this point. Why do you feel that the UK and other UN member states haven't referred the junta to the International Criminal Court?
I think it is very important, firstly, that we have to stop this genocide ongoing on the ground in my country, Burma. And clearly, UK, US, EU, and other international community has this power to stop this crime against humanity. It's crucial that a country like UK and EU and other international free world support the case of genocide against the military generals in Myanmar, support the Gambia case in ICJ, and refer these military generals in Myanmar into ICC. And we absolutely support and cooperate fully with ICJ jurisdiction and ICC jurisdiction, and also universal jurisdictions. And I think it's very important that the world knows that we absolutely support this the case be filed against genocidal military in Myanmar in Germany jurisdiction process. I think Germany is the country that can understand the pain and the suffering of the people of Myanmar, given the nature of Hitler and atrocity have committed. The same thing is happening with genocidal military generals in Myanmar.
If we take a step inside Myanmar with you for just a moment, because there are a number of human rights groups and lawyers inside the country who are cooperating with the German authorities in this case. Give us a sense, give us an idea of what sort of danger they face there.
I think it's very important that the lawyer on human rights and any sensible lawyer understand we are talking about human being. We are talking about persons, individuals. These victims of the militaries are a mother, a father, sisters, and brothers, and they are human beings. And these military generals in Myanmar have been committing these crimes against humanity with complete impunity. They must be held accountable. And I think it's very important that we bring the maximum pressure to the military and then sanction them with coordinated and targeted. And then this military, we have to know, they don't understand words, they understand action. It's a time for international community to take action and bring justice to these survivors and these victims of genocide.
Chris, what evidence is there, if any, that the generals care about these cases that are being brought about them? You said earlier that the cases are closing in on them, but do you think they feel that? Because they're certainly still acting as if they can with impunity.
There is some evidence, albeit anecdotal. Min Aung Hlaing, the Pol Pot of Myanmar, has issued to his army, to his staff, a directive about 6 months ago or more, a directive which simply said, do not cooperate with the mechanisms of international justice. So that's one, I think, very clear sign that they are aware that the work that groups like ours are doing. The other thing I have, anecdotally, it's said that Min Aung Hlaing is frightened of two things. First of all, the Buddhist notion of karma, that he might not have a good next life. And the other is criminal accountability, being banged up in The Hague, like other dictators of our age. So, there is some evidence of that. But I think the important other thing to say about this is that the confluence of this legal work and public advocacy is very interesting because, at the United Nations General Assembly, for example, which has been considering the credentials and has rejected the credentials of the junta unanimously on 2 occasions, it matters there that groups like Guernica, like MAP, like Fortify Rights are doing this work because it plays into the political dynamics. And ultimately what you need for successful prosecutions, yes, you need the legal process to be right, but what helps that enormously is a public environment in which accountability and justice actually matter. So the energy that you create around these cases actually has that effect. So it's not just a question of the junta ignoring, it actually sets an international mood, if you like, that these people are isolated, they're being pursued by justice, and that has knock-on effects in all sorts of other areas. And by the way, I'm not going to cede to the Council of Despair on what universal jurisdiction can do. I and others are absolutely determined that we will find justice for victims of Myanmar. It might take a long time, but the lesson of Yugoslavia, the lesson of Rwanda is that people who commit these crimes will ultimately and can ultimately be held accountable.
Chris, you led me directly on to my next question, which I was going to give to Toby. I mean, this notion of justice has come up time and time again by Dr. Sasa, by Chris. Can universal justice bring victims a sense of justice in this sphere of universal jurisdiction?
Thank you. It's a very easy question to answer. Yes, of course it can, and it does, and it has done in a number of respects. I mean, if we look at the Syrian cases in Germany, we look at what's now being done on the Gambian case in Switzerland. We look at what our group had done as far as the Salvadoran case in Spain. So there is, of course, there is a history of justice being delivered to victims, and of course, what one person considers to be a just resolution is not the same for all victims. I mean, the fact that cases are being pursued and accountability is being pursued is significant, and that does have an impact. Whether that results in an individual ultimately being convicted and sentenced by a court of law, of course that's what we will strive for, but it is the fact that we're not forgetting what has happened and what continues to happen in Myanmar. When we look at all of the conflicts around the world, now attention changes. The attention span of the international community is very limited, and it's important that we don't forget what's happened. We continue to strive. So I think it is important for all of the groups involved to continue to push for accountability when the only route is presently universal jurisdiction. I mean, the thing that we have to consider, as has been stated, so what's happening at the International Court of Justice is not individual criminal responsibility. It's state responsibility for breaching the Convention Against Genocide. What's happening at the International Criminal Court, obviously we want it to move quicker, but that is only going to look at, and it can only look at, forced deportation, because of the fact that the UN Security Council is deadlocked in referring any situation to the International Criminal Court. The only jurisdiction that they were able to establish was through forcible deportation from Myanmar into neighboring Bangladesh, which is a state party to the Rome Statute. So the limited jurisdiction at the International Criminal Court means that we have to turn to universal jurisdiction. And what is particularly encouraging is when you see groups working together, when you see victims working together to pursue justice wherever they can find it. Okay. It is significant.
Dr. Sasa, you fled Myanmar for your life when the military launched its coup on the 1st of February in 2021. You left behind family, you left behind friends who were persecuted. What does justice look like to you?
Well, it's totally important, because just imagine the only crime I have been accused of committing was freedom of expression. I stand up for democracy and freedom and human rights in my country. Because of that, I'm proud that the military charges me with high treason that carry death sentences. 4 of my colleagues who have been very unlucky, were arrested and executed and been killed. And they are committing international crime in front of the international community in my country, Myanmar. And this crime against humanity we are talking about is totally unacceptable. And I mean, this has been there for our people, my people, 75 years. For Rohingya brothers and sisters, 50 years. How many more decades these military generals in Burma will be allowed to enjoy with complete impunity? Because of that, just because of I stand up for democracy, they are targeting not only me, but my family. My mother was sick with cancer, stage 4, and she was chased by the military. And they say, if you live in this village, you'll be killed. And it was totally unspeakable pain and suffering that they have caused to my family. And now, again, not only to my family, now we are talking about more than 3,000 innocents being killed in the last 24 months. More than 20,000 innocent people are being arrested. More than 35,000 churches, schools, hospitals, villagers' houses are being burned because they talk about freedom and they talk about human rights. So justice is absolutely matters to us. And this is the international community that can bring justice to my people. They must cut off all the finance, all the weapons that is supplied to the military now. That will end, at least stop this first crime against humanity.
Chris, in the 1 minute that we have left, why has the world not taken more action when we hear stories such as Dr. Sasa's?
A combination of politics and racism. We've seen with Ukrainians, they're Europeans, they're white, they're Christian, they're not brown, they're not Muslims, they come from a long way away. So I think, first of all, we have to deal with some hang-ups over the whole question of Myanmar. And secondly, the politics. If it were further up the agenda, if countries like Britain, the pen holder in the Security Council, could actually motivate and mobilize some political support in the international community, there is support there. It just needs to be mobilized. So yes, racism and politics. If we can deal with those 2 things, the people of Myanmar would have had justice a long time ago.
OK, well, let's hope they will still see it with the processes that are in place today. Thank you very much to all our guests for joining us, Christopher Gunness, Toby Cadma and Dr. Sasa. And thank you, too, for watching. You can see the programme again anytime by visiting our website. That's aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, do go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Laura Kyle, and the whole team here, it's bye for now.